This NBA offseason is going to be wild. And right now, the trade rumors are too. There's a bunch of reports already out there about some crazy trades that could be coming up. And if any of these happen, it would completely change the NBA next season. First, let's talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo to the Boston Celtics. This was thrown out there by Brian Windhor, and essentially his point was Giannis, if he wants to stay competitive, needs to stay in the Eastern Conference. Right now, if Giannis was to request a trade, a lot of the destinations that are being thrown out there, if not all of them, are in the Western Conference. You've got the Houston Rockets who have a bunch of assets. You got the Dallas Mavericks are the first overall pick. Even a team like San Antonio trying to pair him with Victor Wembanyama. But his point was the East is going to be pretty wide open next year because the Celtics are not going to have Jason Tatum. The Cavs just flamed out in the playoffs again. There's not a ton of top-end talent in the East, and if Giannis really wants to compete, staying in the East would be the right choice. And ironically, he points out that the Celtics would be a good option for Giannis. Obviously, they'd still have to deal with the fact they don't have Tatum, but in a year, they could be right back at the top of the Eastern Conference, especially with Giannis on board. So, how exactly would this work? Is it possible? Well, first and foremost, Jaylen Brown would have to be in the deal. That's the piece at the center of all of this for Boston. He doesn't necessarily have to go to Milwaukee, but he'd have to be going out from Boston to somewhere, and that's the main asset for the Bucks in exchange for Giannis, whether it be, like I said, to a third team, and then they get assets that are the equivalent of Jaylen Brown or then some other kind of construction. And the reason this would make sense for each team is because Milwaukee, generally speaking, is going to have a hard time finding a trade package that works well enough for them as a Jaylen Brown-centered package does. Not necessarily that they would want Jaylen Brown himself, but they could. And that would be better as an individual asset than anything other than maybe the first overall pick from Dallas, which doesn't seem like that's happening. And if they're just looking at overall assets, Jaylen Brown is the best asset out there potentially for them, and or what they would get as equivalent assets if Jaylen Brown was sent to a third team. And for Boston, it's very obvious. Giannis is just better than Jaylen Brown. You put him alongside Tatum. You can consolidate some of your assets on your roster if you're worried about the second apron in the future. If you're worried about contracts and everything like that, if you have Tatum and Giannis on the same team, you're going to be a contender for the next couple of seasons, and that would certainly elevate this Celtics team as they potentially lose some rotation pieces. Unfortunately, the deal doesn't really work. I know that Wendy was throwing this out there. I know it's been a rumor. I know it's something people get really excited about, but as of right now and for the foreseeable offseason future, the Celtics are a second apron team, which means they can't take on more money than they send out in a trade. And they can't combine salaries in a trade. And as of right now, there's no real way for them to get under the second apron without giving away a bunch of stuff. And Giannis makes slightly more than Jaylen Brown next season. And as I said, Jaylen Brown would have to be at the center of the trade. They're not trading Tatum for Giannis. And they can't put together a bunch of other salaries. They can't put any salaries together other than one guy sending out in exchange for Giannis. And so the numbers just don't work out for this to happen, even though it would be really, really cool. Next up, let's talk about another really popular one, the Minnesota Timberwolves and Kevin Durant. I just did a Minnesota video the other day if you guys want to check that out. That talks about the entirety of their offseason. And I did briefly discuss the Kevin Durant thing, but there are some interesting options for Minnesota. This comes up a lot because Anthony Edwards loves KD. It was one of his favorite players when KD was younger, and those two guys appear to have some kind of a connection. They just continue to get linked in rumors and reports as a real option for Minnesota, as a star option alongside Anthony Edwards. A weakness that was exposed for them a good amount in their series against Oklahoma City, where they were able to just load up so much on Ant, and he just didn't have a lot of opportunities to create for himself because all the defensive's focus was on Ant, and obviously that gets much easier if you have someone like Kevin Durant on your roster. So how would this work? Well, first and foremost, Julius Randle would have to be involved. They're not trading Ant. Obviously, they're not trading McDaniels either. He's too important to them, and I don't think that would be the center point of the trade, and teams don't really want Rudy Gobert. And when you look at their salaries, it would have to be Julius Randle, unless for some reason Phoenix was more interested in Naz Reid than they were in Randle. But I don't think that would be the case. I don't think Reid would be the center of a Kevin Durant trade. So the trade would look like Julius Randle, Mike Conley, Rob Dillingham, and the first-round pick that Minnesota has this year, 17th overall via Detroit in exchange for Kevin Durant. In this scenario, the Suns get current and future assets to try and keep Devin Booker happy, which should be the priority of their offseason. If they're not going to trade Booker away, they should try and make sure that they keep him happy in Phoenix. Rando helps them do that in an immediate sense, as does Mike Conley. Then you got Dillingham in the pick as well to kind of help you build towards the future, where, as I said, Minnesota gets their star alongside Anthony Edwards and keeps their core intact. Yes, but there's a couple of problems here. First and foremost, Durant would have to want to go to Minnesota, not exactly the biggest market in the league, and he needs a new contract. So the Timberwolves would be trading for Kevin Ray, would be making this move, but they also would be only doing it for one season. This is a lot to give up for a guy that's only under contract for 1 year. So they'd have to work out an extension with Durant if he even wanted to be there in the first place. You also have to get over the fact that Phoenix might not want this trade package. They're going to be offering Durant to pretty much every team in the league, and this might not be at the top of their list. Minnesota might not want to give up Rob Dillingham, a guy they gave up a bunch to move up and get in the draft last year. And first and foremost, most importantly, probably should have mentioned this already, Julius Randle has to opt into his contract for this to work. He has a player option this offseason, Asen, for $30.9 million. And it makes the money work here if he opts into it. So if you tell him, hey, we're going to trade you to Phoenix if you opt in, and he opts in, that's cool. If not, then you have to sign him to a new deal. But that could get into the a sign and trade possibility, which makes it much more difficult. Another reason why it would be hard for Nasri to be in this deal, all of that together makes this, again, just like the Celtics Giannis thing, unlikely. This is more likely than the Celtics Giannis thing because it's actually possible Minnesota would be underneath the second apron going into the offseason. We already talked about that in a previous video. So it is actually possible if Randall opts in, but there's a lot of obstacles here to make this Durant to Minnesota rumor a reality. Next, let's talk about Darius Garland in Cleveland. Right now, the rumors out of Cleveland are that their two untouchable guys on their roster are Donovan Mitchell and Eva Mobley. The other two pieces of their core, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, both would be available for the right price this offseason. It doesn't seem like they're actively looking to trade those guys, but if someone called and asked, they would at least have conversations. Whereas for Mitchell and Moy, they would not have conversations about those guys. They are keeping them unless maybe it's like a Giannis conversation, which gets super difficult with the new CBA rules. Garland as an asset, as a trade piece, is really interesting to me because I think he's actually pretty underrated around the league if he can just stay healthy. He's a really good creator, someone that I think would shine outside of that system in Cleveland as a guy that would have the ball more because he wouldn't be playing alongside Donovan Mitchell, and I think works in an off-ball role because he's done it in Cleveland recently and is a pretty good shooter off the ball. The first team that comes to mind for me every time we're talking about Darius Garland trades would be the Orlando Magic. They've needed guard help for forever. They've got France, they've got Polo, but every time we get in the postseason, it just gets a little bit tricky trying to create with just those two guys when neither are elite playmakers, neither are elite perimeter creators or ball handlers. And it would just be nice to have a guard that they could give the ball to, and then those guys could screen for the guard. It would just open up so many different options in their offense if they had someone like Darius Garland on their roster. Now, I don't think Orlando would do, for example, a France Wagner for Darius Garland swap. I think they really value France, his two-way ability, and just Garland alongside Paulo doesn't really do a whole lot for them moving forward that Fran alongside Paulo doesn't already do. So, if this was to happen, would Orlando, would Cleveland consider a Jalen Suggs centered package in exchange for Darius Garland? In this case, it would be Suggs, Tristan Dilva, who they drafted last year, the Denver pick that they have this year, and their own first round pick this year as well. Those picks are at 25 and 16, respectively. So for Orlando, you're swapping out Jalen Suggs, who I know they really like, is really good defensively. He's had some injury stuff, as has Garland, but Garland is just a much better offensive player, a much better creator, and someone that could fit really well offensively within this Magic team. And they're so good defensively already. Obviously, some of that's due to Suggs, but I still think they'd be really good even without Jalen Suggs, that they would be able to cover up for some of the defensive issues that have been really apparent for Garland in Cleveland. Whereas the Cavs move on from Garland, they get a nice high upside wing in Dova. They get a guy in Suggs that plays really well alongside someone like Mitchell, allows the offensive hierarchy in the backcourt to be much more clear. It's Mitchell having the ball all the time with Suggs playing off of it. And they get these assets, the 16th and 25th pick in this draft, to potentially make some other moves this offseason, especially if they're looking at moving someone like Jared Allen. Maybe they can upgrade that spot and just round out their roster in a better way. I don't know that either team would actually do this, but if you're talking about Darius Garland trades, I think Orlando makes a ton of sense. And this is a trade that I could see actually happening depending on each team's willingness and interest in a Jalen Suggs center package. Because, like I said, I don't think France is going to be the piece. Next, let's talk about basically an entire team, and it's the New Orleans Pelicans. They might be the most interesting trade team in the entire league because they have a high pick in this draft. They have a ton of assets and a ton of interesting pieces on their roster. And the first guy people are going to talk about, of course, is Zion Williamson. Would they want to keep him? Why would they want to keep him? Who would potentially want to trade for him? Right now, it seems like the rumors are trending towards them keeping Zion for a few reasons. One, there is still value and upside in what Zion could be long term if he could get healthy. And two, his value is pretty limited right now because of the injury stuff, some of the off the court stuff over the last couple of seasons. And this would definitely be selling low on a guy that at one point was an extremely valuable piece. So it would be an odd time to trade Zion unless it was just they don't want to be in the Zion business anymore. They just want to get rid of him. Some other guys on the roster that I think are super interesting is someone like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, even CJ McCollum, I think would be interesting. We just saw what happened with Tyson Daniels last offseason when he got out of the just complete crazy rotation that they have in New Orleans. And his role was much more clear and solidified in Atlanta. And he had a breakout season. I think Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, I think those guys are similar candidates to what we saw for Dyson Daniels last year. And Trey Murphy is already really, really good. Herb Jones, we know how good he is defensively, but Trey Murphy is someone that I think every team in the league would want to trade for. I think Cleveland would love to have Trey Murphy. I think pretty much any contending team around the league would want him. He's an incredible shooter, really good defender, someone that would help a lot of teams around the league. And then, like I said, even someone like CJ McCollum, I could see literally every single piece on the Pelicans possibly up for trade this offseason. And they are by far the most interesting team to keep an eye on. If you're just looking at sheer volume of trades, volume of players potentially being sent out, New Orleans is definitely a team to keep an eye on. Last up, I have to mention this because it keeps getting thrown out there. LaMelo Ball in Charlotte, is he going to get traded? Where is he going to go? Both LA teams continue to get mentioned as well. For the Lakers, it would look like something like Austin Reeves, some other salaries, maybe a couple of picks. They don't really have a whole lot of picks left. It seems unrealistic to me that that would be something that Charlotte would be interested in unless they just don't want to have LaMelo around anymore. They'd rather build around Brandon Miller and some of the other young guys they have. I think that's unrealistic. Same thing with the Clippers. That's been thrown out there as well. Not really sure why they would do that when they already have James Harden. You want to talk about a disaster defensive backcourt? James Harden and LaMelo together. And they have some contracts they could put together to make it work. But I just don't really know why LaMelo would be the piece that you would want for a team that presumably is going to be trying to push and try and contend next season. But that stuff continues to be thrown out there in rumors, and I felt like I had to address it. For the most part, with the exception of the Pelicans, maybe a little bit of the Darius Garland stuff, these rumors are, I will believe it when I see it. Some of them get thrown out there, and they're literally not possible because of the CBA, and some of them just seem far-fetched and unrealistic. But in a world that we live in now, post-Luka Doncic trade, I am unwilling to just completely say no to any trade, pretty much as long as it's, technically legal by the rules of the league. And we will see what will happen in probably a wild, wild offseason.